Good morning. There's a Hubert Johnson here with Taxes Made Easy. Just doing a special 4th of July episode, and want to really focus on, have some fun with this because it is a national holiday here, and talk about some of the backgrounds of the background of the 4th of July, and what are we really celebrating, and how does that lead to our current rights that absolutely affect your rights before the government and your rights when dealing with the government. So I'm going to have some fun with it and hope it's educational as well. And again, if you have any questions, just give us a call. But again, just gonna have some fun with the holiday. It's very important to me as a veteran that we remember the 4th of July and actually what happened here and how this nation was created. So a lot of very key important things for us to remember. And let's have some fun doing it. So we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back, everybody, and gonna kind of focus on a bit of the history at first. What is the 4th of July? Why do we celebrate it, and why is it important? So we're gonna share, a quick video about this and just kind of dive a little bit into the history. There's a lot of historical videos about this, and this one is a little bit of a crash course through history. So here we go.
The founders of this nation signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, parting ways with King George to found the freest, finest nation on the face of the earth. Yeah, except the Continental Congress actually approved a resolution of independence on July 2nd. The Lee resolution was proposed by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia in June of 1776 and was a simple legal declaration of separation from England. John Adams got so excited about it that he wrote to his wife Abigail, "The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore." So what happened on the 4th? Well, not that much, actually. The Declaration of Independence was the formal announcement of independence, and its text was approved on July 4th, 1776. The fancy parchment version with all the pretty calligraphy wouldn't get drawn up until July 19th, and most members of the Congress signed the Declaration on August 2nd. Adams may have been wrong about the date, but he was definitely right about the celebration. Americans started celebrating the 4th of July as early as 1777, and as Adams predicted, the holiday was observed with feasts, 13-gun salutes, and fireworks. Why don't we call them illuminations anymore, Stan? People can say, like, oh, we put a man on the moon, and we can refrigerate our meat now, but I miss the old days. Anyway, in 1778, George Washington celebrated the 4th by giving his soldiers a double ration of rum, and also there was much more shooting than usual. But while the people celebrated the anniversary from the beginning, the federal government took its sweet time in formalizing the holiday. Independence Day became an unpaid holiday for federal employees in 1870 and became a paid day off in 1938. 4th of July observances have evolved over the years, but they generally involve patriotic displays, including decorations, fire, and explosives. Essentially, we celebrate our independence by having a one-day fake war each summer. Huzzah! Freedom tinnitus. Early observances were marked by huge bonfires, but the litigious nature of modern American society has greatly reduced the number of bonfires. However, we still have a lot of fireworks on the 4th of July. Many cities and towns across the country sponsor fireworks displays on the 4th. New York's fireworks display is the largest in the nation. Despite the grandeur of these officially sanctioned displays, many individuals across the nation feel the need to blow stuff up on their own in their yards because, they have all of their fingers. That seems like too many. Many states have restricted the sale and personal use of fireworks, freedom haters, but would-be patriots find their way to marginal neighborhoods every year to buy fireworks out of the backs of vans. In my neighborhood, these personal pyrotechnic celebrations start in about mid-May and continue well into August, causing my dog to have a very stressful summer. John Adams' prediction about gunfire holds true as well. On most military bases, 50 gunshots, one for each state, are fired at noon on July 4th as a salute to the Union. And in Stan's neighborhood, where you go to buy the fireworks out of the backs of vans, celebratory gunfire is common throughout the year. Here is an actual bullet hole in Stan's actual window. Stan, can we get the liberties again? In the 19th century, many ex-presidents celebrated the 4th of July by dying. Both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on July 4th, 1826, and James Madison died on the 4th of July in 1831. Calvin Silent Cal Coolidge was born on July 4th, 1876, but as he was never demonstrably alive, no one really cares that much. Finally, lest we forget, Americans also celebrate the 4th of July by eating. Millions of Americans host cookouts to celebrate independence, and the greatest spectacle in professional sports happens every year on the 4th of July. I am referring, of course, to the Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest. The current world record is 68 HDBs, hot dogs and buns, in 10 minutes. That means the world record holder, Joey Chestnut, consumed about 28,500 calories in 10 minutes. But don't worry, he threw it up shortly thereafter. So happy 4th of July from all of us here at Crash Course. We may not celebrate American independence on the right day, but I would argue that in spite of it all, it's still worth celebrating. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is produced and directed by Steve.
So, fun video. Get it. The history of it is amusing. It's different, but and I'll probably will after the next break share another video. But it is really interesting to know when it was actually signed, when it was actually approved. It was actually approved on July 4th. But when you look at what a lot of these videos I'm going to share today, I think I'm only going to share one more, but it's a little tongue-in-cheek. It's a holiday. Let's enjoy. And but when they signed the Declaration of Independence, they were still in the middle of a war. There was nothing certain about America winning at that point. So to put this into perspective, everybody that signed it, and if you look at it, the big name is John Hancock, which again refers to signatures today. If captured, this was their death warrant. They were signing on and acknowledging to the world that they were committing treason against the British, against Great Britain. And not all of the signers made it through the war. So again, it was, I think it's important to note, a lot of people think of politicians as kind of, making declarations and then hiding out. Many of them were young men. Many of them fought and died in the war. Some were captured. And again, it was not, many lost their homes, had family members killed as they went through this revolutionary war to obtain freedom for the country and fight for their freedom. So that's often overlooked. So it's kind of humbling what people go through and what the founding fathers did for our country. It wasn't just easy peasy as many assumed. So I'm going to share another slide, and this really goes into the founding documents of our country. So, and this is straight from the National Archives. You have the Declaration of Independence, and again, you can look at the, you read the actual transcript of it, or just go to it. But this is in the course of human history. Again, this is where we declare why we are breaking from the British Empire and declaring our independence. And it talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then we're going to focus more on the Constitution today and the Bill of Rights, especially the Bill of Rights, because most of our rights are enshrined in the Bill of Rights and the amendments that came thereafter. So this is going to be more of an educational, let's have some fun with it, but at the same time, learn a little bit of our history. That's more, falls right into my alley. I love to talk history. I was a history major in college and was actually planning to be, to teach high school history, IP history courses, which was my whole goal. So these are the, really, we know about the Constitution. Not everybody knows that the Constitution was not signed until later. That when we finally gained our independence, the first government that we had was called the Articles of Confederation. When we think of a confederacy, we think of the southern states, the Confederacy versus the Union. And what's the difference between a confederacy and a union? And this is very key to how our government is formed and the question of states' rights versus the federal government. Most people in this time did not see them as members of the United States of America. Yes, they did 4th of July, but first of all, they were Virginians first. They were New Yorkers. They were Georgians. They were from South Carolina, North Carolina. Their loyalties and where they resided and grew and spent most of their lives really came from their loyalty to their home state. And many of these states considered and treating themselves as independent countries. How do you think it worked to have 13 essentially independent countries printing their own money, trying to make deals, trades, positive trade agreements, and tariffs, etc.? It was a mess. And again, farming did not thrive. The economy did not thrive because the federal government, under the Articles of Confederation, was very weak. So everybody was running around and considered themselves members of their states above the federal government. And for that reason, the Articles of Confederation did not last more than a couple of years. And then they came back and they did the Constitutional Convention and drafted the Constitution, we the people. And the Constitution lays out the different parts of the government. It has different articles, so many articles, and pretty much lays out how the government is supposed to work today. So it created a much more stronger central government, but it still preserved the difference between the federal government and the states, because people, in general, still saw themselves as loyal to their states. When the Civil War broke out, there were plenty of people that were against slavery, but still fought for the Confederacy. Now, what was the Confederacy fighting for? Why were they splitting off from the United States? It was all about slavery in the end. But there were plenty of people that resigned U.S. commissions in the Army and the Navy and went and fought for the Confederacy because that's where their state went. And so understanding where people's perspectives, it wasn't as established, well, it wasn't nearly as established today. And the fight to preserve the Union turned out to be the bloodiest war the United States has ever had, especially as far as the percentage of the population killed. So when we come back, we're going to watch another video, have a little bit more fun, but then dive into the Bill of Rights, because that was the number one criticism of the Constitution, is that it did not lay out and protect individual rights. Now, the framers of the Constitution said, well, of course it's in there. Of course people aren't going to abuse rights. We should be very glad that the people didn't trust them. They didn't trust the federal government. And we'll get back to this after the break. Welcome back, everybody. And just to keep things lively and interesting, we're gonna watch another video, and also from YouTube. And this is gonna again give some information.
Broadcast Cal here, and in this video, I'm going to tell you 10 interesting facts about America's birthday that I bet you didn't know. Now, besides hot dogs, fireworks, and epic standout baseball games, there are some other interesting facts to know about the 4th of July, and I'm going to share 10 of those with you right now. Some of them will surprise you. See how many you know. July 4th, 1776 is known as Independence Day. I'm assuming you already knew that one. It's the day when we celebrate our independence from Great Britain. And it all started with a written document called the Declaration of Independence. Question number 1. How many people signed the Declaration of Independence? Answer: 56 people signed it. And they were all from the original 13 American colonies. Question number 2. Who wrote the majority of the Declaration of Independence? Chosen by his fellow men because of his ability to write, Thomas Jefferson wrote the first draft within 2 weeks. Question number 3. How old was Thomas Jefferson when he wrote it? He was 33 years old. Knowing how important this task was, he rented a room in Philadelphia so he could get away and focus on writing the most important document of his life. He knew the weight his words would carry and the consequences that would follow. Ultimately, those words would lead to the American life that we know today. That's crazy when you think about it like that. Okay, question number 4. What were the 2 main goals of the Declaration of Independence? Number 1, to explain why the American colonies had to break away from King George and Great Britain. Number 2, to declare to the world what this new country stood for. Okay, this next one will surprise you. And to be upfront, this video is not sponsored by Apple. Question number 5, true or false? The Declaration of Independence was written on a laptop. Answer: true. Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence on a writing desk that could fit over one's lap. The device was handmade himself and referred to as a laptop, not to be confused by today's version of a laptop. Today's U.S. population totals over 330 million people. Question number 6. What was the estimated population of the U.S. back in 1776? Answer: 2.5 million people, which is about the population of Houston, Texas today. Do you recognize this famous painting by John Turnbull that's printed on the back of every $2 bill? It's called The Signing of the Declaration. This painting shows Thomas Jefferson and the 5-man drafting committee presenting the document to the Continental Congress President, John Hancock. To many people's surprise, this event did not take place on July 4th. Rather, almost a week earlier, on June 28, 1776. Question number 7. What date was the Declaration of Independence officially signed by the 56 signers? Answer: August 2nd is when the majority of 56 signers signed the document. The final wording of the document was officially adopted by Congress on July 4th. And that is why July 4th is known as the U.S.'s Independence Day. However, most of the 56 signers were not present when the document was approved. It wasn't until August 2nd, about a month later, that the 56 men were able to sign the famous piece of parchment paper. If you ever want to see the official document, it's on display at the National Archive Building in Washington, D.C. The average age of the 56 signers was 45 years old. Question number 8. What were the ages of the youngest and the oldest signers? The youngest signers, Thomas Lynch Jr. and Edward Rutledge of South Carolina, were only 26. And the oldest signer was Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, who was 70 years old. Of all the signatures on the Declaration of Independence, there is one that stands out from all the rest. John Hancock. His signature is the reason why, if you're ever asked to sign something, you may hear a request for your John Hancock, which is synonymous with the word signature. Legend has it that he wrote his name so large because he wanted King George to see it without putting his glasses on. America. Now, question number 9. Who was the first person to sign the Declaration of Independence? Also, John Hancock. Another reason why his name is synonymous with the word signature. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both signed and both helped write the Declaration of Independence. They both became U.S. presidents and they both died on the same day. Hours apart from each other. Question number 10. On what important date did these two U.S. presidents and signers of the Declaration of Independence both die? Answer: July 4th, 1826. Exactly 50 years to the day from July 4th, 1776. The day that established our independence. The day we honor and celebrate our nation's freedom. Happy birthday, America. Broadcast Cow out. Hey, if you like this video and want to see...
Very cute. Again, I watched it and I thought that would be great to share. It's just a lot of good information, and it is important. That's I read something earlier that it's was their duty to serve, talking about people that have served our country, especially in the military. But it's our duty to remember. So there's plenty of videos. There's one I saw preparing for the show where it shows. People going around and asking people at the beach or at barbecues on the 4th of July, hey, why are we celebrating the 4th of July? Most of them have no clue. Doesn't surprise most people because, again, it's just, this is the party crowd, the college crowd, and most of them, they don't even know why we're celebrating the 4th of July. But here's, to get a little more real or somber, I want to go ahead and share another article, and this is fairly short, but it's from MWS, the sacrifices of the Declaration signers. So it just lists out what happened. So this is going to be fairly short, and michaelwsmith.com. So happy 4th of July to everyone here in America. Just a reminder of the price that was paid for our freedom. I honestly just did not know that the great sacrifices that these men paid makes me love this country even more. So what happened to them? 5 signers were captured, treated as traitors by the British, tortured before they died. So how many of us would be willing to sign a document like this, knowing that it's treason against the country and we're signing our own death sentence? So for these 5, absolutely happened. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the Revolutionary Army. 2 had sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships of the Revolutionary War. When they signed, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the defense of the ideals that were in the Declaration of Independence. And this isn't the only country where people stood up and pledged their lives, their fortunes for what they believed in. You had the revolution in France, went a little differently than our revolution, not in a good way. But again, here, these founders really did put their all, and they were wealthy men. So first of all, 24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers and large plantation owners. These were men of means, well-educated, and they signed knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured, which happened to about 10% of them. Well, dashed by being captured and tortured by the British. This goes through some of the individual sufferings of different members of the 56 that's signers. So Carl Braxton of Virginia He was a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ships swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts and died in rags. A lot of them suffered greatly through the Revolutionary War. Thomas McKean was hounded by the British so much that he moved his family constantly. He served in Congress without any pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward, so he died a pauper. Vandals or soldiers or both looted the properties of Elliot, Clymer, Hull, Walton, Gwinnett, Haywood, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, which was the final battle where we were able to force a large British army with the help of the French fleet, and also the French landed an army as well. The British were defeated by the French and American armies together, with George Washington leading ostensibly the troops. And Thomas Nelson Jr. was there, and he noticed that the British General Cornwallis had taken over his home for his headquarters. Then he quietly urged General Washington to open fire on his own home, and the home was destroyed, and he died bankrupt. That takes a lot of guts. To call down cannon fire on your own home, knowing it could help shorten the war. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. They jailed his wife, and she died within a few months. So it wasn't just them, but their families that were put in harm's way. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and gristmill were laid to waste. And after a year of living in forests and caves, he returned into his home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Norris and Livingston died similar deaths. So again, they were not wild-eyed, rabble-rousing ruffians. They were some of the cream of American society. They were soft-spoken, men of means and education. Well, some of them were pretty loud. But they had security, they had comfort, but they valued liberty more. So, they pledged all for the support of the Declaration and relying on the protection of God, divine providence. And they put in there, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So, heavy words that they actually carried through and delivered on. So again, when people talk about the Founding Fathers, it's hard not to acknowledge the sacrifices they made. And, many of them some of the worst imaginable, but to stand up and not only sign their names to the document, but many of them still continue to volunteer to sacrifice, either fighting in the war or losing their means, and even blowing up their own home in a battle to support this cause. So, I got a pretty neat article here, and I want to before I step into it, I want to talk a little bit about the history here between the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So, and I had mentioned this earlier, so when the Constitutional Convention approved, they assigned the Convention of States at the Constitutional Convention. They assigned it out to write a constitution and bring it. And there were multiple proposals, different ways of looking at it. The big states wanted it to be based on a vote of population. The smaller states thought they would be overwhelmed, and they wanted the same number of votes by state. And so they came up with a compromise that we currently see in our government, the Senate and the Republicans, and it's a compromise between, it was the Virginia plan, and I don't remember if it was the Delaware plan, but it was two different plans that were proposed. They made a compromise to come up with our current form of government. However, many of the states would not, and the delegates would not sign on to the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. They had seen their rights trampled by Great Britain, and they did not want to repeat. They did not want to create the same monster as before. And a lot of people argued, hey, this, you don't have to worry about this. This would be protected. They didn't trust government as far as they could throw it. And in many instances today, I would agree. Don't trust government as far as you can throw it. So enough states insisted on the Bill of Rights being part of it, that they made an agreement that the Bill of Rights would be adopted when the Constitution was. So, until the next break, we're just going to introduce this article here. And we're going to do a quick rundown of all 27 amendments, because this is really where a lot of our personal rights come from. And it's very interesting how they lay this out and break it down to different eras. So you have the founding era, gave us our first 12 amendments, including the Bill of Rights. Most people don't realize that there were 12 amendments initially, not 10. And then you have the Reconstruction era, gave us the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. That's all centered around slavery post-Civil War. And then you have a 60-year gap to the Progressive era, and that gave us the 16th through 19th Amendments. And then you have a, again, 40-year gap here. So it usually has a huge gap, and then you get a bunch of amendments. The modern era, 8 amendments, little by little, from 1993 to 1992. Interesting history of the 27th Amendment. And now we haven't had an amendment the last 3 decades. So, interesting history here, and we're just going to dive right into it. And to most of these you should know. If you're not familiar with this will be a good recap. But these are some of the most valued rights and privileges that we still use today. So I'm going to check I'm coming up on a break in just a couple more minutes, but we can go ahead and start. So First Amendment, the First Amendment. Everybody talks about the First Amendment, but what does it cover? It covers freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of petition. And we're just going to do a quick overview because we've got a lot of material to cover. First, it protects religious liberties in 2 ways. It guards against government establishment of religion. Most of the countries at this time had one favored church or religion. And being that this was a very religiously diverse society when the 13 colonies split off, they wanted to make sure that no one religion was favored over others, but it also protects the free exercise of religion. And today, it really is the right to freely believe or not, as we wish, and not have government force religious views down our throats or one religion. And so when it was first passed, it really was they didn't want the government favoring one religion over others. Today, it's been construed more and more to not have the government support religion, period. Which is very ironic, given that in every single session of Congress and in most legislatures, they start with a prayer. So religion is very much part of the fabric of our country in more ways than you would imagine, especially on Capitol Hill and in most legislatures. And the same is true for the California legislature. Now, they have all kinds of people from all different kinds of faith offer prayers, and but it is still a tradition to this day, which is eye-opening. So again, it's not a complete abdication of religion in public life, period, but the government favoring or supporting one over the other. And we'll be right back. So I'm going to have to go through these a lot faster than I was. There's so much to each one of these rights, and they're so important. But again, freedom of religion or lack of religion, freedom of the speech and press. So this is a big one in the news lately with the Supreme Court actually ruling for the government. Today we have censorship, government censorship through Facebook and other media, through Twitter, which was then bought out. But again, having a free press and free speech where the government can't dictate what is okay to say. Whenever you hear misinformation or fake news or whatever, and we need to ban and control this, that all violates the First Amendment's freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Now you can't do stupid things like yell fire in a crowded in a theater or something like that and endanger others, but you do have the right to free speech. Freedom of assembly and a petition, which means you have the right to get together with the other group you want. So it, again, includes African Americans getting together. They weren't allowed to through a lot of Jim Crow period because they didn't want people getting together, finding common cause, and using the power that can be found in numbers. Women, unpopular political groups, abolitionists in the early 1800s. So this is a very important part of the First Amendment, freedom of assembly to get together with whoever you want, and the freedom to petition the government to try to get wrongs corrected. Doesn't mean you'll get them corrected, but to try to do that. And in many countries, I would say most countries throughout the world, you don't question the government. The government makes the decisions, and if you question them, you can get in a lot of trouble, or it just goes absolutely nowhere. We operate very differently, where we believe the government is not the final arbiter. You have ways to petition, to try to challenge the government and change what's going on if you don't like it. Second Amendment, everybody's familiar with the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. And again, that's fairly straightforward. Interesting thing, if you actually regulate or read into the text, a well-regulated, citizen-led and filled militia was not to fight foreign powers so much, but was to, if you listen to the content, especially the comments and where the founders were coming from, they didn't trust the government so much that they wanted the people to be armed and be able to topple the government. And many people that signed on the Constitution would be blown away to find out it's still here 200 years later. Many of them would have taken up arms already against our current government. And not just the amount of power that the federal government has. And again, that's not a referral to the reference to the current administration, but in general, the power of the federal government is so different today than it was back in the 250 years ago. The Third Amendment, this is something that doesn't really come up, but it prevents the government from forcing citizens to house soldiers. Something the British did was a huge inconvenience, and they hated it. So they made it part of their amendment saying military can't force people out of their homes or force people to quarter or provide, allow soldiers to stay in their homes. So that isn't a big issue, hasn't been, but it's definitely in response to some of the abuses that the British government or armies did when they came in. And it's interesting to note when the Revolutionary War broke out, I would say at least a third of Americans were definitely in favor of staying loyal to Britain. Another third were indifferent, and you had about 1/3 that were patriots. So acts like this, abuses of people and the atrocities committed by the British really did force a lot of people into the patriot camp. But you had Americans fighting on both sides in the Civil War. The Fourth Amendment, very, very important. Protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. And this is by the government. So how protected? Your persons, they can't search you, they can't question you. It's from this that we get Miranda rights. Your houses, your papers, effects. The government has to have some kind of reason or a warrant, and they have to go to a judge and get the warrant. If they don't have a particularized suspicion or reason, they can't just search you. So the police or the government can only invade someone's right to privacy, property, or liberty if they have a specific reason or probable cause to think that they've done something wrong. Otherwise, if they do an illegal search and they find stuff that's wrong, it's excluded from court and can't be used against someone in a court of law. So the Fifth Amendment has to do with the takings clause. It says the government can't just come and take your private property without just compensation. So if the government wants it, they have to pay for it. Seems simple enough. It really gets into a lot more complicated issues, but you have this basic right where the government just can't take your property. The Sixth Amendment, this is a very important amendment. So again, right to a jury trial in criminal cases. So a trial jury of your peers. A right to counsel, a lawyer, again, goes with the Miranda rights. A speedy and public trial, an impartial jury. So they think with the speedy and public trial, they can't just hold you in jail forever and wait for a trial. You have a right to an impartial jury. You have a right to be informed of what crime the government is charging against you. So these all go back to basic rights to protect against a lot of the abuses by the British Crown and the British government. You have the right to cross-examine whoever comes and testifies against you, to see your accusers face to face. And then a compulsory process for witnesses. So to defend yourself, you can subpoena and force witnesses to show up in court. So again, if you have people that just don't want to show up, you can still defend yourself through the subpoena process. Seventh Amendment extends the right to a jury trial in civil cases. So again, if you're going to take someone's property, you still have a right to a jury trial in many cases. So, but that's for federal cases, not always for state cases. Eighth Amendment protects against cruel and unusual punishment, excessive bail, and excessive fines. So basically, if you're going to prosecute someone, you can't hit them with cruel and unusual punishment. That's why, again, the death penalty is such a tricky issue today. Excessive bail, there's a lot of people fighting against bail, period, for better or worse. And excessive fines is, in the news today from the, recently the fines that they were trying to hit President Trump with, or former President Trump with, over 300, close to 400 million in fines, was found to be excessive and reduced down to 100 million, which is still the largest ever. But again, it was put in a realm where he could actually bond it out while they go through appeals, whereas the previous amount was so high, it was a historically high number, far beyond any bail company's ability to provide. Ninth Amendment says that all other rights are reserved to the states. It also indicates that people have a lot more rights that are clearly written in the Constitution itself. So whatever isn't mentioned in this is still reserved to the states and to the people. Currently, that's interpreted to be to the American people and not so much to the states. But then you get the 10th Amendment. This really establishes federalism, the balance of the federal government versus the states. So it really sets up a power structure between the federal government and the states. And I got to move even faster if I'm going to get through this. So then they passed the 11th Amendment, and it bans national courts from hearing lawsuits against states. So again, states have sovereign immunity where you can't just sue the state, go to the federal government, and punish the state. So again, this is the state stand up for the rights. 12th Amendment, this goes to the electoral college and just address some of the early issues coming out of the nation's earliest elections. So essentially, it was possible for a vice president candidate to win the whole thing. So they corrected that. There's a lot of history going into that, but we're gonna skip on past that. And so, the way it was set up originally could lead to some funky results, and when they realized that, they changed it. Reconstruction after the Civil War. You got the 13th, 14th, and 15th. 13th abolished slavery, and then 3 years later they said, okay, well, we abolished slavery, but they're not giving them their freedom in the South. So they, in and the 14th is used a lot. It protects individuals from the states and says, the freedom, you still have the same freedoms federally. The Bill of Rights is now extended to the states, and you have equal protection before the law. So the Equal Protection Clause. And the 15th Amendment got rid of racial discrimination in voting, or supposedly did. As we know, Jim Crow laws eroded that and took away many rights. But the whole point here is to give them those rights. And I'm going to have to move through these even quicker. 16th Amendment, power to pass an income tax. Congress shot it down, or no, the courts had shot it down a couple of times. And so they told Congress, if you want to do it, you have to do it by constitutional amendment. So eventually in 1913, that's exactly what happened. So you're not going to fighting against an income tax claim. It's unconstitutional. Is not a winning argument. It's a very bad argument. Anybody pushing that is trying to get you to go to jail. The 17th Amendment changed it from the legislatures choosing U.S. senators, and then they put that directly in the hands of the voters. So again, a lot of legislatures were very corrupt, but it was further insulated the Senate from direct democracy or vote by the people, and they got rid of it and put it directly for a vote. So I think that's a good amendment. 18th Amendment prohibition was removed by the 21st Amendment. So again, 18th and 21st just cancel each other out. 19th Amendment was the right for women to vote. So it got rid of sex discrimination in voting. Again, huge victory for women and for suffragettes. And again, I think a huge step in the right direction. The modern era, you had 20th Amendment, just reduced the length of time between when the election would happen, when a new Congress and a president took office. It used to be until March, but back in the old days, people had to travel, news had to get around. But again, by moving to January, it gets rid of a lame duck period where, again, people have been voted in, but don't have any real power as a result of this. And moving on, 22nd Amendment, President Roosevelt served 4 terms, died in his 4th term. So I think everybody was pretty much on board. And before that, people had limited themselves to 2 terms as president. And, that's pretty much, nobody's really contesting that, and it wasn't contested at the time. 23rd Amendment gave the District of Columbia some say in the presidential elections by giving them 3 electoral votes. 24th Amendment banned poll taxes in national elections. So this is part of the civil rights movement. Again, this happened a lot, mostly in the South, where they would charge people a tax to go and vote. And this really was used to keep African Americans from voting. And again, these laws were often enforced or reinforced by intimidation and violence. Didn't just happen in the South, but again, a huge shame, a black mark on our country. We're glad we've moved past that. 25th Amendment, this is after JFK, covers the issue of presidential succession and incapacity. So there were plenty of people in the Trump administration claiming that they should use the 25th Amendment, claiming he was off his rocker, etc. Whether or not he was, we're now having the same argument now with President Biden. So if someone gets too old, and part of this is we have presidential candidates that are older than ever. I'm not sure why. But again, when Nixon resigned, the 25th Amendment just outlined that President Gerald Ford became the next president. And moving on to the last 2, 26 was amended in 1971, reduced the voting age to 18. And this was nationally. Not all states allowed those under 21 to vote. So it set a national floor to 18, and people were going and dying in Vietnam, but couldn't vote. So that was seen as an injustice, and that was changed. The 27th Amendment is a weird one. It started over 200 years later, and you had a student that was angry about his grade on his homework. He was assigned to discuss some kind of mechanism, government mechanism. So we went back and found out that the 27th Amendment was started back in 1789, it got some states that passed it, but it never really went through. And all it does is it makes it that Congress can't increase their own wage. They can increase the wage for future Congresses. So after election and a new Congress is seated, but they can't raise their own pay too much. And it sat there and was ignored. And this student, again, many more states. In 1982, he got a C on his paper after writing about this, and he said, this is furious. So he took it up, challenged it, and got this amendment actually ratified and included in the Constitution. Talk about a dedicated student. And so that's the 27th Amendment, was ratified in 1992. So this is where our rights come in from government. They're outlined in the Bill of Rights and the amendments mostly in the Constitution. And it is wonderful to know that we do have rights. And that's what creates us as a land of the free. We just need to defend and respect those rights. And go out, have a wonderful 4th of July. Thank a veteran. Go enjoy the celebrations and have a great time with your family. And we will see you next week here on Taxes Made Easy.